Welcome back. This is Julie Broglin, and I've decided I'm going to do some summer readings with you. And I've decided to start with Pena Chodron and her book called When Things Fall Apart. And I decided this before the George Floyd murder, and I decided this at the end of the semester during the coronavirus pandemic. And I just thought I'll just do one or two chapters at a time, and perhaps you might want to listen to it while you're driving or while you're getting ready for sleep. And I thought I love Pena Chodron, and I love the advice that she gives, and she's walked this life, and she puts it well and easy to understand. So I'm going to start with her introduction. I'm reading from When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times by Pena Chodron. Introduction. In 1995, I took a sabbatical. For 12 months, I essentially did nothing. It was the most spiritually inspiring time of my life. Pretty much all I did was relax. I read and hiked and slept. I cooked and I ate, meditated and wrote. I had no schedule, no agenda, and no shoulds. I got a lot digested during this completely open, uncharted time. For one thing, I began to read slowly through 2 cardboard boxes of very raw, unedited transcripts of talks I'd given from 1987 to 1994. Unlike the Dothan talks that made up the wisdom of no escape and the Long John teachings that make up Start Where You Are, these talks seemed to have no unifying thread. Now and then, I would look at a few transcripts. I found them from everything pedantic to delightful. It was most interesting and embarrassing to be faced with such a profusion of my own words. Gradually, as I read more, I began to see that in some way, no matter what subject I had chosen, what country I was in, or what year it was, I taught endlessly about the same things: the great need for Maitri, loving kindness towards oneself, and developing from that the awakening of a fearlessly compassionate attitude toward our own pain and that of others. It seemed to me that the view behind every single talk was that we could step into uncharted territory and relax with the groundlessness of our situation. The other underlying theme was dissolving the dualistic tension between us and them, this and that, good and bad, by inviting in what we usually avoid. My teacher, Chongyang Trungpa Rinpoche, described this as leaning into the sharp points. It occurred to me that for all these 7 years, I've been simply trying to digest and communicate the helpful and very gutsy instructions that Trungpa Rinpoche gave his students. As I delved into the boxes, I could see that I still had a long way to go before fully appreciating what had been taught. I also saw that by putting Rinpoche's advice into practice as well as I could, and by attempting to share this experience of a student's path with others, I had found a kind of fundamental happiness and contentment that I had never known before. It made me laugh to see that, just as I had so often said, making friends with your own demons and their accompanying insecurity leads to a very simple, understated relaxation and joy. About halfway through the year, my editor, Emily Hilburn-Sell, happened to ask me if I had any more talks that might be useful for a 3rd book. I sent her the cardboard boxes. She read through the transcripts and felt inspired to tell Shambhala Publications, "We have another book." Over the next 6 months, Emily sifted and deleted and edited, and I had the luxury to work further on each chapter to my heart's content. When I wasn't resting or looking at the ocean or walking in the hills, I would get totally absorbed by these talks. Rinpoche once gave me the advice, relax and write. At the time, it didn't seem like I'd ever do either of these things, but years later, here I was following his instructions. The result of this collaboration with Emily and my year of doing nothing is this book. May it encourage you to settle down with your life and take these teachings on honesty, kindness, and bravery to heart. If your life is chaotic and stressful, There's plenty of advice here for you. If you're in transition, suffering from loss, or just fundamentally restless, these teachings are tailor-made. The main point is that we all need to be reminded and encouraged to relax with whatever arises and brings whatever we encounter to the path. And putting these instructions into practice, we join a long lineage of teachers and students who've made the Buddha Dharma relevant to the ups and downs of their ordinary lives. Just as they've made friends with their own egos and discovered wisdom mind, so can we. I thank the Venerable Chongram Chungwa Rinpoche for totally committing his life to the Dharma and for being so eager to transmit the essence to the people of the West. May the inspiration I received from him be contagious. May we, like him, lead the life of a Bodhisattva, and may we not forget his proclamation that chaos should be regarded as extremely good news. Pena Chodron. She wrote this in Gampo Abbey, Pleasant Bay, Nova Scotia, 1996. And I'll start the first chapter. I'm up in the Berkshire Mountains, and it's very cold, so I'm all bundled up. But I'm very happy, and I hope you feel my happiness in this reading. First chapter. Again, this is from When Things Fall Apart by Pena Chodron. This is the first chapter, Intimacy with Fear. Fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to truth. Embarking on the spiritual journey is like getting into a very small boat and setting out on the ocean to search for unknown lands. With wholehearted practice comes inspiration, but sooner or later we will also encounter fear. For all we know, when we get to the horizon, we're going to drop off the edge of the world. Like all explorers, we are drawn to discover what's waiting out there without knowing yet if we have the courage to face it. If we become interested in Buddhism and decide to find out what it has to offer, we'll soon discover that there are different slants on how we can proceed. With insight, meditation, we begin practicing mindfulness, being fully present with all our activities and thoughts. With Zen practice, we hear teachings on emptiness and are challenged to connect with the open, unbounded clarity of mind. The Vajrayana teachings introduce us to the notion of working with the energy of all situations, seeing whatever arises as inseparable from the awakened state. Any of these approaches might hook us and fuel our enthusiasm to explore further. But if we want to go beneath the surface in practice without hesitation, it is inevitable that at some point we will experience fear. Fear is a universal experience. Even the smallest insect feels it. We wade in the tidal pools and put our finger near the soft, open bodies of sea anemones, and they close up. Everything spontaneously does that. It's not a terrible thing that we feel fear when faced with the unknown. It's part of being alive, something we all share. We react against the possibilities of loneliness, of death, of not having anything to hold on to. Fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth. If we commit ourselves to staying right where we are, then our experience becomes very vivid. Things become very clear when there's nowhere to escape. During a long retreat, I had what seemed to me the earth-shaking revelation that we cannot be in the present and run our storylines at the same time. It sounds pretty obvious, I know, but when you discover something like this for yourself, it changes you. Impermanence becomes vivid in the present moment. So do compassion and wonder and courage, and so does fear. In fact, anyone who stands on the edge of the unknown, fully in the present, without reference point, experiences groundlessness. That's when our understanding goes deeper, when we find that the present moment is a pretty vulnerable place, and that this can be completely unnerving and completely tender at the same time. When we begin our exploration, we have all kinds of ideals and expectations. We are looking for answers that will satisfy our hunger we felt for a very long time. But the last thing we want is a further introduction to the boogeyman. Of course, people do try to warn us. I remember when I first received meditation instruction, the woman told me the technique and guidelines on how to practice and then said, "But please don't go away from here thinking that meditation is a vacation from irritation." Somehow, all the warnings in the world don't quite convince us. In fact, they draw us closer. What we're talking about is getting to know fear, becoming familiar with fear, looking it right in the eye, not as a way to solve problems, but as the complete undoing of old ways of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and thinking. The truth is that when we really begin to do this, we're going to be continually humbled. There's not going to be much room for the arrogance that holding on to ideals can bring. The arrogance that inevitably does arise is going to be continually shot down by our own courage to step forward a little further. The kinds of discoveries that are made through practice have nothing to do with believing in anything. They have much more to do with having the courage to die. The courage to die continually. Instructions on mindfulness or emptiness or working with energy all point to the same thing. Being right on the spot nails us. It nails us right to the point of time and space that we are in. When we stop there and don't act out, don't repress, don't blame it on anyone else, and also don't blame it on ourselves, then we meet with an open-ended question that has no conceptual answer. We also encounter our heart. As one student so eloquently put it, Buddha nature cleverly disguises fear, kicks our ass into being receptive. I once attended a lecture about a man's spiritual experiences in India in the 1960s. He said he was determined to get rid of his negative emotions. He struggled against anger and lust. He struggled against laziness and pride, but mostly he wanted to get rid of his fear. His meditation teacher kept telling him to stop struggling. But he took that as just another way of explaining how to overcome his obstacles. Finally, the teacher sent him off to meditate in a tiny hut in the foothills. He shut the door and settled down to practice, and when it got dark, he lit 3 candles. Around midnight, he heard a noise in the corner of the room, and in the darkness, he saw a very large snake. It looked to him like a king cobra. It was right in front of him, swaying. All night, he stayed totally alert, keeping his eyes on the snake. He was so afraid that he couldn't move. There was just the snake and himself and fear. Just before dawn, the last candle went out, and he began to cry. He cried not in despair, but from tenderness. He felt the longing of all the animals and people in the world. He knew their alienation and their struggle. All his meditation had been nothing but further separation and struggle. He accepted, really accepted wholeheartedly, that he was angry and jealous, that he resisted and struggled, and that he was afraid. He accepted that he was also precious beyond measure, wise and foolish, rich and poor, and totally unfathomable. He felt so much gratitude that in the total darkness he stood up, walked toward the snake, and bowed. Then he fell sound asleep on the floor. When he awoke, the snake was gone. He never knew if it was his imagination or if it was really there, and it didn't seem to matter. As he put it at the end of the lecture, that much intimacy with fear caused his dramas to collapse, and the world around him finally got through. No one ever tells us to stop running away from fear. We are very rarely told to move closer, to just be there, to become familiar with fear. I once asked the Zen master Koban Chino Roshi how we related with fear, and he said, I agree. But the advice we usually get is to sweeten it up, smooth it over, take a pill, or distract ourselves. But by all means, make it go away. We don't need that kind of encouragement. because disassociating from fear is what we do naturally. We habitually spin off and freak out when there's even the merest hint of fear. We feel it coming and we check out. It's good to know we do that, not as a way to beat ourselves up, but as a way to develop unconditional compassion. The most heartbreaking thing of all is how we cheat ourselves of the present moment. Sometimes, however, we are cornered. Everything falls apart, and we run out of options for escape. At times like that, the most profound spiritual truths seem pretty straightforward and ordinary. There's nowhere to hide. We see it as well as anyone else, better than anyone else. Sooner or later, we understand that although we can't make fear look pretty, it will nevertheless introduce us to all the teaching we've ever heard or read. So the next time you encounter fear, consider yourself lucky. This is where the courage comes in. Usually we think that brave people have no fear. The truth is that they are intimate with fear. When I was first married, my husband said I was one of the bravest people he knew. When I asked him why, he said because I was a complete coward, but it went ahead and did things anyhow. The trick is to keep exploring and not bail out, even when we find out that something is not what we thought. That's what we're going to discover again and again and again. Nothing is what we thought. I can say that with great confidence. Emptiness is not what we thought. Neither is mindfulness or fear. Compassion, not what we thought. Love, Buddha nature, courage, these are code words for things we don't know in our minds, but any of us could experience them. These are words that point to what life really is when we let things fall apart and let ourselves be nailed to the present moment. And this ends the first chapter of When Things Fall Apart, written by Pena Chodron. I'm choosing this not because I think that people that practice yoga should choose to be Buddhists. I think, as the Dalai Lama says, that we should choose a practice that's comfortable with our own cultural experience. And we could always embellish and add different ornaments of different things that we find as we mature in our spiritual development. But there's lots of good things that are similar or just like the yogic practice. I find it in Buddhist teachings. So I spent some time reading them, and I thought it'd be great to share with you now. It's something to do with, I was thinking about us being, even though we're kind of getting out of the house, but when we were stuck in the house, it kind of let us have time to really reflect and think a lot more. And I think that maybe a lot more of us are able to really take in these words now to heart and to mind. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll be reading the rest of the book and different points in time. Thanks very much. Take good care. Please subscribe and like. Bye-bye. Namaste, Julie.